So I'm Carolyn Best, Director of Arts and Letters Live at the Dallas Museum of Art, and we're delighted to celebrate with all of you the recent acquisition by the DMA of this work by Walter de Maria. I hope you all enjoyed seeing the installation tonight. It goes off view this Sunday, and the sculpture will travel to SF MoMA, and I think it is particularly exciting that the DMA and SF MoMA partnered together to purchase this work of art together, so it will be shared between our two institutions. Arts and Letters Live is supported by our annual season supporters, the K. Catarula Endowment for the Literary and Performing Arts, and the McGee Foundation Arts and Letters Live Endowment Fund at the Dallas Museum of Art. Additional major support is provided by the Hirsch Foundation. The Fairmont Hotel Dallas is the exclusive hotel partner for the 2016-2017 Arts and Letters Live series. Promotional support is provided by KERA. Exclusive magazine sponsor is Texas Monthly, and in-kind support provided by Einstein Printing. A few notes about logistics tonight. We'll start with presentations by Gavin Delahunty on the art and sound of Walter de Maria, and then Geoff Dyer on his book White Sands, followed by a 5-minute performance excerpt of de Maria's Ocean Music by Stockton Helbing again. And then Gavin and Geoff will have a brief conversation center stage, and finally we'll open the floor to questions from all of you. So if you'd like to ask a question, simply raise your hand and one of our staff members will bring you a wireless microphone. And if possible, please stand when posing your questions so that those on stage can see and hear you clearly. After the event, we invite you to meet both authors at the book signing in the concourse near the museum store, where copies of their books will be available for purchase. And now I'm pleased to introduce Gavin Delahunty, Hoffman Family Senior Curator of Contemporary Art here at the Dallas Museum of Art. Since his arrival at the DMA in 2014, Delahunty has organized numerous exhibitions, including Rebecca Warren, The Main Feeling, Frank Bowling, Map Paintings, and Jackson Pollock, Blind Spots. This past April, he installed the first major commission by a U.S. museum of an artwork by Rebecca Warren in the new Eagle Family Plaza. In 2018, Delahunty will open a retrospective exhibition on Günter Furg, the first U.S. museum show dedicated to the German artist in nearly 30 years. Delahunty recently published a monograph on Walter de Maria entitled Counterpoint, Sculpture, Music, and Walter de Maria's Large Rod series, and he'll be signing copies of that book, which is hot off the press tonight at the book signing. Please welcome Gavin Delahunty.
Hello, thank you, Carolyn, and welcome, Geoff. And could we please just give Stockton another quick round of applause? I do not know if I feel uncomfortable and I just wanted him to stop, or I'm in some kind of transcendental meditation. But either way, I can tell you that that was the first time that it has been performed since 1964. And it sort of pushes you to a place, both the performer, it's a test of endurance for the performer, but also for the audience. And I applaud you for sitting through it, because it's kind of amazing. So I'm hopefully, as Carolyn mentioned, my interest in De Maria crosses over into music. And tonight I hope I'm going to very briefly introduce some of those thoughts and make sense of what you just heard. In fact, that is a previously unpublished image of De Maria performing cricket music in 1964 in London. And famously, he played his drums standing up. When Walter de Maria was a high school student in the Bay Area in the early 1950s, he ran for office as student representative. He was an unpopular candidate, described by fellow student Dennis Oppenheim as mysterious, nonconformist, sensitive, but almost dangerous. After the other students took the stage to give their speeches, De Maria prepared to deliver his own manifesto. But instead of addressing his audience as expected, he set up his drum kit and chanted his name repeatedly to a rhythmic beat. Oppenheim described De Maria's performance as mesmerizing, like an early Steve Reich or Philip Glass. Serial music, he called it. To his peers, De Maria's stunt must have been fascinating and infuriating in equal measure. Perhaps it was a cynical commentary on the futility of student elections, or an astute observation that success in the context of elections is achieved by those who repeat a mantra and shout it the loudest. Interesting. Whatever the purpose, this unrecorded and little-known performance by De Maria, it highlighted his long-standing interest in percussion and prefigures his forays into musical composition, which extended into the 1960s. These actually are, as part of the process of working through the publication, but also the installation, we had another percussionist called Jason Truting transcribe both cricket music and ocean music so we could better understand them. So at the beginning of the decade, when minimalism was taking its form in visual art, De Maria was working on his sound recording cricket music, which you heard this evening. 24 minutes long, the composition precedes De Maria's more formal sculptural work and is a virtuoso exercise in rhythmic drumming to which he has added the sound of chirping crickets. This short presentation that I will do this evening, is about revisiting the compositional structure and pattern of cricket music, along with ocean music, in the belief that I hope I will illuminate his musical practice for you. Although the term came much later in use in relation to sculpture, minimalism in music is widely understood to have begun with Lamont Young's Trio for Strings in 1958. 58 minutes long, the trio established Young as the first composer to truly adopt a minimal language. It is cast in a single movement with a haunting reliance on long, sustained tones. In his programming notes for the work, Young describes how the instruments, the sequences of pitches, are not designed to be played, and I quote, as individual parts, but as contributions to a chordal unit whose components are of different durations. Young also stipulated in his notes that the production of a smooth, steady bow direction so that the long, sustained notes should sound as uninterrupted as possible. The effect has been likened to sculpture, reinforced by the performances of statuesque players. And a bit like we saw Stockton this evening, these performances by these early minimalist pioneers, the performer is kind of caught, stuck in this repetitive rhythm, so they become statuesque. Lamont Young had arrived as a graduate student at the University of California, Berkeley in September 1958, and he quickly established himself among his fellow students as singular and an innovative composer. At Berkeley, he wrote several more scores and held multiple performances, both formal and informal, and among them was a very important work called Collaborative Event, and it was a pair of concerts organized in partnership with the Department of Architecture, and the three performers were Lamont Young, Terry Riley, and a young classically trained percussionist called Walter De Maria, who described Young as the only person of any consequence that I ever met in Berkeley. De Maria's friendship with Lamont Young ultimately influenced his decision to move to New York in October 1960, and in New York they immediately fell in with a group of like-minded musicians, composers, poets, choreographers, filmmakers, and artists who were ostensibly drawn from the downtown avant-garde scene. In July 1961, De Maria's exhibition Boxes, Ropes, and Explicit Directions and Demonstrations was presented alongside solo shows by Lamont Young, Ray Johnson, Yoko Ono, and Yvonne Rainer as a part of series of evenings of artists' projects devoted to that particular group. In 1963, he became the drummer in the he became the drummer in the short-lived pop band called the Drudds, with Lamont Young was on saxophone, Paddy Oldenburg was the lead vocalist, Larry Poons was the guitar player, Andy Warhol and Lucas Samaras were the backup singers, but most remarkably of all was that Jasper Johns wrote all the band's lyrics. At the same time as these projects and collaborations, De Maria was constructing some of the earliest known examples of minimalist sculpture, including the one on the screen here called Ball Drop. The ball or sphere in Ball Drop would develop as an important symbol for De Maria, much like the square, circle, rectangle, cross, and swastika. Reflecting upon the influence of music on his work, Ball Drop incorporates an acoustic element. A brown, rectangular, coffin-like plywood box accommodates two square openings on its front face. Both are centrally positioned, one just above eye level and one approximately at waist height. Instructions on the side of the box invite participants to take the wooden ball out, which is about the size of a grapefruit, and place it in the opening above. Without pause, the ball drops from the upper hole to the lower one, like that, striking the plywood frame and producing a loud crack. I actually had the pleasure, or not, of activating that sculpture myself. You feel a very peculiar childlike compulsion to repeat the process, and a certain humor when you do, that seems to derive from the combination of the work's plain, symmetrical proportions and the arbitrary nature of the game. So much like I have, in fact, I have one son who's 2 today, and much like I find him banging things in my house repeatedly over and over again, to which he thinks is terribly amusing, and it's endlessly annoying to me and his mother. It's the same sort of childlike fantasy or process that De Maria is kind of getting at. He's trying to draw out that kind of innate pleasure we find from such simple actions. Ball drop informed De Maria's sound sculpture for Lamont Young, 1965 to 66, which you see being performed here. And it's a narrow open container made of aluminium in which sits a solid aluminum ball. Integrated into the sculpture were 3 contact microphones that in theory could be connected to an amplifying system. The built-in mics and mixer pick up and amplify any ding created by the ball as it's rolled inside its channel. The amplification is not used for its own sake, but to emphasize the sculptural characteristics and its material. By design, movement of the ball is limited. Essentially, it can be rolled at variable speeds from left to right and right to left, with some opportunity for up and down. As a result, the area available for movement restricts the sound activity, reducing it to a minimum with a high possibility of repetition. The distinctive thing about this instrument is the process of rolling the ball is both the subject and the source of the music. In De Maria's words, what you see is what you hear. Along with those sculptures, De Maria made 2 sound recordings, one of which you heard this evening, Cricket Music, and Ocean Music from '68, which we'll hear later, a small extract from it. We wouldn't put you through the whole thing again. Cricket Music begins with a drum roll lasting 1 minute 48 seconds, followed by a 6-second pause and then a 6/8 drum leap loop. The type of loop it's actually derived from an Afro-Cuban feel that often offers listeners a few ways to hear the rhythm. And you might have noticed that tonight, even though Stockton was repeating a certain pattern, you audibly hear it in different forms. So it's actually changing in your mind as you're hearing it. The style was popular amongst jazz musicians, and in fact it originated in West Africa, as well as the larger African diaspora from Cuba to New Orleans. The most unexpected audio element of cricket music, and I encourage you to go back to the display in the museum to listen to this, because it was slightly inaudible tonight because of the power and presence of Stockton. But the most unexpected element is that of a low-flying propeller aircraft, which can be heard prominently from minutes 20 to 22, and subtly thereafter until the works close. The surprise introduction of the airplane prompts the listener's mind to move from earth to sky. In its concluding minutes, Cricket Music introduces the concept of vast spatial distances between insect and airplane, and wave frequencies both audible and inaudible, which are being transmitted from Earth at all times to infinite points in outer space. It positions the work within the new environmentalism of the 1960s, a movement that was emerging concurrently with a radical critique of government and an acknowledgement of ties among ethical, environmental, and social issues for artists at that time. For De Maria, these ideas stem from cricket music to reach the apex in his land art works. This is a photograph of a Soviet SS-4 medium-range ballistic missile being assembled for installation, taken by an American U-2 spy plane which was making a high-altitude pass over Cuba in October 14, 1962. There may be a more pointed reference to the sound of the airplane and the style of the drumming in cricket music. In October 1962, a US surveillance plane discovered the presence of Soviet missiles in Cuba. One of the first occasions that the recently established National Photographic Interpretation Center publicly interpreted images it obtained from the government by aircraft. High-altitude spy planes could produce evidence of ballistic missile facilities collecting signals and imagery using radio waves alongside other intelligence sensors. This aerial surveillance of the land triggered the Cuban Missile Crisis, which brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. It is conceivable then that the worldwide tension created during the 13-day scare informed the unexpected presence of the airplane in the final minutes of cricket music. This aerial perspective on the land would later become key to imagining and imaging de Maria's expansive works of land art. Like cricket music, ocean music combines two compositional elements, an acoustic drum kit and a pre-recorded sound drawn from nature. In this case, surface waves breaking across an ocean. In both pieces, the pre-recorded loops are used to create a repetitive, rhythmic musical pattern and a dense layer of sound over the drummed acoustic elements performed by De Maria. Of the two, ocean music relies on a purer process. 8 minutes of unaccompanied sound of crashing waves opens the piece, and gradually the sound of drums builds to meet and challenge the soothing sound of the waves. In this sense, the composition of ocean music relates to the artist's best known attempts to harness nature as a sculptural component in his long-term installation, The Lightning Field. This work of art in western New Mexico attempts to connect the sky and the earth by way of a gridded field measuring 1 mile by 1 kilometer and containing 400 sharpened metal spikes that are in effect lightning rods intended to solicit the energy of lightning. Famously, the work is pictured attracting lightning in 4 of the 6 photographs De Maria selected, including the cover to illustrate Lightning Field as part of its unveiling in the 1980 issue of Art Forum. So, to summarize, I hope that I've had a small opportunity to introduce De Maria's interest in music and how it was integral to the development of his artistic practice during the 1960s. His early sculptures often have an acoustic element to them or definitely function as instruments to be played according to De Maria's instructions by referring or referencing composers such as Lamont Young and John Cage. De Maria indicated his own often overlooked place in the downtown avant-garde while intervening in the critical discourse surrounding what would come to be known as minimalist music. With his own recordings, cricket music and ocean music, De Maria produced percussive soundscapes that prefigure the land art for which he would become world famous. Rather than representing nature in any sentimental sense, these compositions conjure humankind's surveillance of and control over the landscape and its inhabitants. Their rhythmical repeats systematically mapping the earth, sky, and sea. Thank you very much.